Thanks for joining us, Chris. I really appreciate your time, but you're the corporate vice president for the Office Media Group at Microsoft. But the reason that I wanted to talk to you is because you were involved, just one of the key people involved in the creation of one of my favorite tools in Office, which is Microsoft OneNote. What can you tell us about how OneNote got started?
Um, yeah, well, let's see. It's basically a little more than 20 years ago now, which is a long time. I've been at Microsoft. This is my 28th year at Microsoft, and I was at the time in 2000, towards the end of the year 2000, I was the group program manager of Word,
Hmm.
and the senior VP for Office, a guy named Steven Sinofsky, sent me a note, me and the VP of Word, my boss. And he just sort of asked, like, hey, should we make a new application? I think there's space for something around outlining, organizing thoughts into a structure, maybe the kind of work you do, research before you make a document, and so on. And it was a pretty detailed mail, and I ran to him in the hallway and chatted with him a bit more, and I thought, this is, first of all, he blew my mind because I was junior enough that I didn't know you could just propose a new application. I didn't know how you went about that. But once he opened that door, I thought, oh, that's really cool. Now, what would I do? And I listened to what he was saying, and I felt he was putting a big emphasis on this very structured way of thinking, and he used the word outliner quite a lot. And I was like, I know because he's a super genius, like, and I know he's a very structured thinker. And I thought, I know there's people who do outlines, but I'd been in Word for quite a while, and Word has an outlining mode, and I knew it didn't get that much usage, but it had its fans. And so I wasn't super keen on the whole outlining, super structured thing, but I thought, okay, let's park that. That's worth doing for people who like outlining. But this other idea of like gathering information really appealed to me, and I thought, what I would do is I'd sort of turn this around a little bit and say, I wish I had a place that I could just throw things that I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them. They aren't necessarily in service of writing a document
Yeah.
or really anything. I just might think they're interesting, kind of like a scrapbook or a notepad maybe or who knows what. There's mostly things that people at the time were using only paper for. I'll give you a little side story. I'm like many people, I wish I was organized, but I'm too lazy to actually be organized.
Yeah,
Okay. So
me too. Yeah.
I was aware of people, similar jobs to mine, project management oriented people who had very structured ways of capturing all this information into beautiful paper notes in meetings. And I can't take notes and think at the same time, so I don't do that.
Yeah.
But I do jot down stuff and try to remember it for later, but I tried using paper for it. And I remember I was moving offices once and I found in the process of picking stuff up three separate fat notebooks, which I had filled 3 pages of
Yeah.
with notes and then lost, because I put it under something.
Yeah.
And I thought, paper is really a terrible solution for this in some ways. It's amazing at others.
Mm.
Um, but the thing I wanted was I want a place I can just throw something. I didn't want a Word document because I'd have to name it something and put it somewhere, and then it would,
Save
what
it,
would I
right?
do? Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's not, Word isn't really meant for collecting random things
Yeah.
and so on. And
You mentioned
Outlook,
Outlook as well in your blog post, yeah?
what's that?
You mentioned Outlook in your blog post as well.
Yeah, yeah. And so Outlook was another one where the Outlook team had said, hey, it would be great to have like sticky notes or something, but
Yeah.
the implementation was not strong. And then they also had this structured way of capturing things like, a phone number. And I would, someone used at that time would tell me a phone number or a URL or something, and you write it on a sticky note and lose it. But I wasn't really going to fire up Outlook and go hunting for the place where I'm allowed to write a URL down. It just didn't make sense for me. Um, and so I thought, what if I had a tool that could just instantly show up and let me capture stuff, type it or paste it, and this is interesting, I think, especially for you, the
Yeah.
tablet PC was a thing that was happening
Yeah.
secretly inside Microsoft at that time. And of course, we were thinking, well, notes, handwriting, ink, digital ink. What if we did a thing that was great at digital ink? And then I thought that would be cool, but practically most people will be typing. And so let's do a hybrid, a thing that can do ink and typing or pasting of images. And it was very important as I put these ideas together over that Christmas holiday period. I sort of took a break, as everyone did,
You
and I
said
went
you
off
wrote
and
You wrote a
Huh?
proposal or a paper.
Yeah, I wrote up a sort of vision document, we called it, of what I think this thing should be to try to attract feedback.
Wrote
And
that in Word. You wrote that document or PowerPoint or something.
well, I wrote it in Word because I was the Word guy. So yeah. Um, and it's still floating around. Actually, the current OneNote team keeps an archive of vision papers for OneNote. We used to call, and I had to come up with a code name, so I called it Scribbler because I thought that's cute, and I wanted it to be not intimidating like some of our professional document tools are, and I wanted it to be sort of
Yeah.
ink sounding. And the idea of scribbles meant it didn't have to be important stuff. It could just be things I wasn't sure I would need for later.
Yeah.
And so I came back from the holiday period with that doc, and I sent it around and to Stephen and a couple other people, and he said basically, yeah, that sounds great. Just get going.
And so with OneNote still, like I've tried out a lot of the other note-taking apps. There's more and more of them these days. This is
Yeah,
20 years old, but you had this blank canvas where you'd open up the page and there was just not much there, nothing there. No A4 size, no limits. A
yeah,
lot of the apps I see out there now, they're trying to sort of force you into some sort of, it's a to-do list or it's this or that, templates and
yeah.
things like that, which people like. But what was the idea behind that sort of blank slate? What was the thinking there?
Part of it was, why are we making a new tool versus just adding a few note-taking features to Word? And part of the reason was that, you know, very abstractly, Word is a linear free-flowing document, right?
Yeah,
And something like Excel is a grid, and PowerPoint is a two-dimensional space with pages, right? And
yeah,
so I was thinking, but I don't want those models. I want the flexibility of a sheet of paper, which can let you do anything, whether you're handwriting or putting shapes in, or you're taking structured handwritten notes or typing. And then what if, and just like on paper, we looked at we actually did a fun study, which I'm really proud of, is we sort of asked the community of people who had let us know that they would be willing to give us feedback about office stuff. And we said, hey, if you wouldn't mind, send us your notes. Take your notes, shove them in a manila folder, and mail them to us, and we'll send you $20. And we got about 500 people to send us their notes.
yeah,
And the notes were whatever they thought they were, right? So
yeah.
sometimes they were,
That's
daily planners, sometimes there were sheets of typed paper, sometimes they were handwritten.
yeah,
And we took them and we put them up on the wall all down the hallway of our product team hallway. And we had a fun time sort of sorting them into no structure, light structure, heavy structure, typed, and so on.
yeah,
But when you looked at it, you realized a lot of people are writing linear, but they do linear plus something. They linear plus doodle, or linear plus a table or a diagram.
yeah,
And that sort of like flexibility seemed very important. And if you had a word-like tool, the Word lets you type, but then the space on the side is not really accessible to you, right? So there's a guy who joined the project right at the beginning, named Peter, who was our development manager, and he and I had many fun discussions of like, what is distinguished or what's distinctive about what we're going to make? Well, it's flexibility. And then, like you mentioned, it wasn't A4 or US letter sized paper. Like Word's design goal was, you're going to print this at the time,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so they really wanted paper. But for OneNote, we said, you might print it, but you might just want an infinite canvas, like that you can spread out and use the space.
yeah,
And we
yeah,
don't want to put a limit on you. But it was a very difficult design challenge, because if you put nothing, then you're asking people to figure out what to do with it, like ordinary paper. Or we thought we could put structured things like a to-do list or whatever, but then it gets more complicated, and it started to feel actually more like that Outlook experience where you have to hunt and say,
yeah,
what type of paper am I allowed to write a to-do item on? And
yeah,
we were very keen on we had some principles. It has to boot really quickly. It has to never lose your notes, and it has to let you capture whatever you need immediately without hunting around for the right place,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, yeah, and so that was what we said, is like, we first write it down and then make it a to-do item, or flag it as an important thing or a follow-up question. And that's where the tag feature in OneNote came from. But
ah,
capture first, file later.
yeah,
And getting back to that lazy thing, the
yeah,
lazy guy inside me, we had an insight, which is something like 85% of the population are pilers. You get a thing and you stick it on a pile. And
Yeah.
the remaining people are the organized filers. They just
Yeah.
take a thing and they go, well, this belongs here, and they go put it in the right place.
Yeah.
So we said, how can we have like a flexible piler-oriented thing, but also let the filers choose where to go, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So appeal to the lazy, disorganized, and
Yeah.
allow them to get better. That way you have a ramp of, to get in on it.
Yeah, it definitely resonates with me. I'm definitely in the pilot category, but I know
Yeah.
those people that are the super organized, organizers. So we've always sort of joked about it within the Microsoft circles that that I've worked with, that it's Redmond's best kept secret. Um, why do you think it is that people are still, sort of discovering OneNote, even though it's 20 years down the track?
Yeah, it's funny, that Redmond's best kept secret, that was our second tagline that people gave us. We said one place for all your notes, but then people added that onto it. Um, I, it's complicated. If we were a smaller company at the time and it was our only product, we would have talked a ton about it, but there was a lot going on. It certainly did get a lot of announcement excitement, but on an ongoing basis, you know, you don't think about, like, the company also never promotes Excel or PowerPoint or Word, right? They never talk about the applications. They talk about the Microsoft brand, and they might occasionally talk about Office for productivity. But there's kind of this basic assumption, which is in terms of return on investment for marketing dollars, it's better to boost the image of Microsoft as a capable tool than it is to talk about individual apps and features like they might have in the 90s. It was the 2000s where they're talking about the system of
Yeah.
Office. And it was very frustrating because I would point out, as I'm sure you would agree, that works great if people already know what's in Office. So when you say Office, lots of people would be like, I get it, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. And then I'd be over here going, hello, there's a new thing. And if you just talk about Office, no one's ever going to know about the new thing. And that was very frustrating for the OneNote team.
Yeah.
But I also took away from it, marketing is not the solution to these things. Making a great product that people tell other people about is the way to success, word of mouth.
Yep.
Virality, we would call it now. At the time, virality wasn't quite a thing, but
Yep.
we had the concept of this is in fact one of the reasons I was so excited to add multi-user notebooks and real-time co-authoring, which we added in 2004,
Okay.
ahead of basically everybody,
Yeah.
um, because we wanted someone to say, oh, let's use this for our team's repository, kind of like a wiki, but structured. And that idea actually took off, and that's why OneNote spreads through organizations.
Yeah.
I'm
Yep.
constantly running into groups that say, oh, we keep everything in OneNote.
Yeah.
So yeah, it didn't get talked about a lot in marketing. It did a little,
Yeah.
but marketing is like a crutch, As a product guy, I'd rather the product speak for itself.
Yeah. And I think like it was a radical change for the way people worked. Dropping the A4 or the letter size piece of paper and moving to a different way of filing, different canvas. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's harder for people to adopt. In my experience, I've introduced it to many companies over the years, big companies, and it's sort of gone through those companies, just like you said. But at first, I'd open the notebook with somebody, and they would open it up, and I could see that it had been opened in the past, probably around
Yeah.
2007, because of the structure of the note page that came up,
Yeah.
and then it had been closed again. They never knew what it was. Like, oh,
Yes.
I accidentally opened that. I didn't really want that, so close it down again, and that was sort of their
Yeah.
whole interaction with it. But in the last couple of years, from what I've heard, uh, through some of my connections, OneNote usage has gone through the roof, especially with
Yeah.
the pandemic. So I kind of
Yeah.
feel like, not sure what your take on it is, but kind of feel like being forced to work from home has made people reevaluate what they do with their paper notepads and
Hmm.
that stuff that you talked about, that we just don't know where to put it, and maybe
Yeah.
they're starting to discover it a lot more. Um,
Well, a couple of thoughts on that. Like your point about there's some old notebook and you can tell that they probably opened it and closed it shortly after. That was always a big struggle we had because we put OneNote out as a never before seen thing, right? It wasn't like a copy of something. It was unique. There wasn't really a product like it. And so you couldn't say, oh, you know that thing that you already do, this is a replacement for that.
Yeah,
Instead, people would say, well, why would I use it? And you'd say it's a digital notebook. And a lot of times they would say, but I don't have a tablet PC, right?
yeah,
And we'd say, well, you type your notes anyway. A lot of people do, right? And they're like, yeah, but I just use Word for that. And we're like, is Word working for you? And they'd be like, no, but
yeah,
you know, so so that was a little tricky, but we also found like if we ever, anyone on the team found this, if you ever had a moment to explain what OneNote was, then people became fans pretty quickly on a pretty high fraction of them. It
yeah,
was only when they were all alone. And you know, we didn't have, back then, we didn't have this kind of first run experience stuff that you can do now where you have like pop-up helper balloons that say, do this, try that, click this button, you know, to sort of walk you through. And what's happened in the last few years is that OneNote, and especially in education, has really taken off because as a tool for classrooms where teachers can use OneNote to kind of distribute homework and collect up homework,
yeah,
not by emailing or putting files in some folder, but kids just open their notebook and
yeah.
write their or type their whatever, and it's already synchronized into the class notebook. And
Teacher.
that capability has, I mean, teachers love it because they can see
Yeah,
when the kids did it and where they get stuck, and they can kind of look over their shoulder halfway through it, you know, because it's not a submission, so they love it. And
yeah.
then the
Class
pandemic
notebook
really
is
has made it.
definitely something that teachers should know about. Lots of them do, but if they're not currently, I'd say I was going to ask you, what do you wish that people knew about OneNote? That would definitely be one thing to put in there.
Yeah, yeah, the class notebook and the fact that you can work with other people very effectively in it. It just becomes a place that you can put stuff and other. It's not like a document that you co-write, you know, like a word processor. It's a repository of your team's wisdom.
Yeah,
And you know, I've over the years I've talked to people all the time about how this works, and actually my car's license plate is OneNote, so I get
ah,
occasionally totally random people asking me, "Oh, did you work on OneNote?" And I say, "Yes, I did." And then they say, "I love it," and then they tell me how they use it. So that's always fun too. But yeah, in the
you even wore
pandemic,
a,
that
you even
go
wore
ahead.
a purple themed shirt today, which is great.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's a story. The reason OneNote is purple is it's my favorite color. So we
Awesome.
were trying to decide what the icon would be, and there was a push from some very, I think, literal people saying it should be post-it note yellow.
Yeah,
And I was like, oh no, man, no way. I love purple, a deep purple that would be great. Could go with the other, you know, red, green, and blue of the core apps.
yeah,
And so it was available on the color wheel, and we said we're doing purple, and in it went. And so, yeah,
here we are.
here
Um,
we are.
eh, so a quick question for you then. Which version of OneNote are you currently using, if you can say?
Yeah, I use the OneNote version that comes with Office Windows 360, not Windows, Microsoft 365, which
Yeah,
is the what you might call the Win32 version, not
the
the
desktop.
Windows 10
Yeah,
version.
yeah. Okay, cool. Good to know. And what do you think about the future of OneNote? Where do you see it going? What problems do we need to solve? And what's the
Yeah.
what's the future?
Well, I mean, it's no secret the team, I mean, after I was no longer associated with it, the team decided that they would standardize on a new code base that was shared with their Android and iOS version, and they were calling it Modern OneNote, which is the nickname for Windows 10 applications, right? Actually started in Windows 8, but
Yeah,
that idea of a new universal Windows platform, but also sharing the core code with mobile apps. And it went along. I mean, some of us were like, "Are you sure?" Because there's so much work that went into the Win32 core code.
yeah,
Isn't that the thing you should be putting on all the devices? Because you want to have coherence, right? You want the same core engine on the different platforms. But they went that way, and then they eventually, over time, they figured out it's going to take too much to try to replicate what people love about the original.
mm,
And so a few months ago, maybe almost a year now, they
yeah,
announced that they would converge on the Win32 version. But of course, the Win32 version was showing its age because no one had been showing it any love for the past
yeah,
6 to 8 years.
yeah,
And so they are going to take the best concepts out of the Windows 10 version and the modern version and sort of modernize the user interface of the existing one, but take the best of all that richness and depth of richness that
Yeah.
is in the classic app. So I really am happy that they've chosen that path, because coming together and unifying is so critical. It was
Yeah.
driving everybody nuts, including me, that there were two versions of it.
Two OneNotes, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How's that work? Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's funny. I was talking to the guy who manages the OneNote design team just yesterday, and he was saying, once you make the decision, you look back at it and say, "What were we thinking?" But it was, hindsight is 2020.
Yeah, and I get what they were trying to achieve, and it's a shame that it didn't, pan out. But I think the future looks pretty bright anyway.
Yeah.
And there's lots of, news around things like the Fluid framework and OneNote showing up
Yeah.
in all sorts of places, which is really interesting. But just over to you now, Chris. Working in the Office Media Group. Tell us about what you're doing now and what's happening there.
Yeah. Well, the kind of thing I like to do is I like to make new things, and I like to explore stuff that hasn't been really figured out yet. So what we're doing in Office Media Group is it's kind of got a horizontal component, which is we're looking after the media experiences across the kaleidoscope, the galaxy of apps, if you will, the constellation. So things like video, photos, 3D objects, audio, that kind of thing. And pretty basic stuff has not been done yet in Office. Like you can't put a video into Word and have it play back in line, for example. You can have it play, but it has to pop out in and it doesn't feel like a native thing. And so we're working with all these teams to do that. But we also on my team, we take care of Stream, which is the organizational video experience, video app and service
Yeah.
for Microsoft
Wanted to
365.
say
And we,
YouTube for within organizations. I don't know if we should say that or not.
yeah. Well, we sometimes casually say YouTube for enterprises, but
Yeah.
I mean, the funny thing is, we used to call it that, and it sounds so sensible. And we talk to customers, and they love that name. They say, "Yeah, YouTube for enterprises." But then we found the more we talk to customers, which I'm a big fan of, by the way, talking to customers, is they would say, yeah, YouTube for enterprise, but can you make it so that not everyone can post videos to it, and we can control everything and segment it and apply access controls, and we don't want to, allow regular employees to pollute the executive communications channel, et cetera, et cetera.
The video
And
responses.
so we were like, oh, so basically not YouTube. Like you actually, you mean not all the things that YouTube is famous for, and instead you want a video service that behaves actually more like a document or a SharePoint site, things with like lockdown controls and collaborative teams and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we also do photos and video editing and 3D stuff in Windows as well.
So
Yeah,
the new Photos app in Windows 11, is that part of your?
that's right. That's our team putting that in there to clean up that too.
Okay.
Um,
Good.
yeah, and that's where, you mentioned at the top of this interview the Clipchamp acquisition that we announced just 3 days ago now. And that's part of it too, to make video editing that's straightforward and powerful. And it runs in the browser, but it can also run as a progressive web app in Windows, and it can be part of Microsoft 365. And
Awesome.
I'm super excited about that, to have the Australian folks in Brisbane join our team.
So that Clipchamp, that organization will come in and we can expect some of those sorts of features to pop up in Windows and Office in the not too distant
Oh
future.
yeah, we're going to try to do as much with it as we can. They have like a unique technological advantage, which is that with video, it's so processor intensive, right?
Yeah.
And their videos are so huge that when you go to edit a video,
Yeah.
you kind of need a pretty honking machine to do the editing.
Yeah.
But that means if you run in the browser, to edit the video, you're going to have to upload it to the cloud before you can edit it, which is not great. If you've got an hour-long video like this interview,
Yeah.
uploading it all to the cloud before you can do any editing and then the whole editing experience is hard to make seem interactive. But they've got a technique where they can run local native code as a WebAssembly and
Oh,
use the GPU of the computer they're running on. So they deploy it through the browser, but they compute using your own computational power, which lets them do really fast editing locally, including even offline, which is odd for a web app.
wow. That's
So
awesome.
it's, yeah, fast local video editing delivered by the cloud. And
Wow.
of course stored, like, backed up to the cloud. So if you go to another machine, you still have access to your projects and your videos and so on. Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
That's pretty exciting, Chris. So, well, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate you having here, and I hope our audience has something to say, and leave it in the comments below. Yeah, thanks again, and I'll let you get back to your Friday afternoon.
Yeah, and your Saturday morning.
Yeah, indeed.
That was great talking to you, Brett. Thanks for
That's been
calling,
awesome.
and I love talking about OneNote anytime, anywhere.
I can't do hair and makeup, and
Well, it wouldn't make any difference, I think. But anyway, yeah,
yeah,
so great. Hey, great to talk with you.